this is live. So today we're going to do a lesson about how to memorize the fingerboard using octave shapes. And of course, the word memorize is in there, so there is going to be some memorization involved, but these octave shapes are there to make things easier for you. And before I dive in and show you some camera guitar stuff here, I wanted to pop over to my website first to show you a really handy tool for this kind of thing. So if you scroll to the bottom, where are we? There we are. And go right down here to scratch paper. This is something really awesome that one of my patrons over at my online school on Patreon made this for me. And if you go down here, you've got just these blank fingerboards that let you do some experiments. You've got some color choices you can make here. And then you've got this cool All Notes button. And this will come in handy, but if you click a single note, it'll show you every instance of that note, every octave of that note on the fingerboard. And this little cascade of notes here is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to give you some fun, simple ways to start memorizing the fingerboard. And this might even relate to the CAGED system in some way. Also, I'm going to do a Q&A after this, so if you've got questions, I've got the chat ready, and you're welcome to ask a question later when we get to a stopping point. But let's pop over to the camera guitar and get started. I'm going to grab this pick that I just found on the floor. So, with anything that involves memorization, there's going to be a little bit of memorization first, and that is to just start with your open strings, right? E, A, D, G, B, E. I had a student once, young kid, who came up with his own little eat apples, dude, goats be eaten. And that's always stuck in my head. I actually forgot what the original one, because eat apples, dude, goats be eaten is just such a funny thing. So E, A, D, G, B, E is a starting point. And then at the 7th fret, you've got the word bead, B-E-A-D. So eat apples, dude, and bead is a starting point. So now, let's talk about shapes. Obviously, we've got a very basic, if you could even call it a shape, we've got 2 E strings, which means anytime you play a note here, it's going to be the same note down here. Anytime you play a note here, it's going to be the same note here. So if you're trying to figure out this note and you can't remember what it's called, maybe you'll remember what this is called. Or if you play this note and you can't remember what it's called, you can always go back to bead and go, all right, bead. But this is just kind of the basic stuff you got to memorize to get started. And from here, we can talk about our first shape. And eventually we'll have a whole cascade of shapes that go up the neck. So anytime you have a note on the low E string, you can go 2 toward the floor and 2 toward the body of the guitar. So here's an E. If I go 2 toward the floor and then 2 toward the body, now I've got this matching shape. So we've got E and E here. So that means if you know the notes on even just this one string, right? If you know E, F, G, A, B, well, now we can figure out E, F, G, A, B, right? So memorizing the fingerboard already, we have sort of a shape now that lets us move up the fingerboard, right? E, F, G, A, B, here's a C right here, right? B is our anchor here, B, E, A, D. So this is a cool shape. Let's look at one more shape. So if we've got the A string, we can use the same 2 toward the floor and 2 toward the body trick. So 2 down and then 2 toward the body, right? And now we've got another octave shape. Previously we had this one, now we've got this one. So that means that thing we were doing here of just memorizing octaves, we can do the same thing here. A, B, C, D, E. Now we're at the E of bead, right? So this is pretty cool. And it turns out this little trick on these 2 bottom strings, it doesn't work on these strings. Whoa. So yes, yes, no, no. So what do? Well, for the D string and the G string, we have to move up one more fret. So we can still go, we can go 2 down, 2 toward the floor, but then we gotta go 3 up toward the body. And now we have that same kind of shape, but it's a little more stretchy. So if we go up to the A of bead, right, this is just an octave shape, and it turns out this same shape works here on the G string and the E string. And someone said, what, George Benson in the chat. George Benson played a lot with octaves. What am I? Right, it's actually kind of fun to mess around with these little shapes. Yeah. Wes Montgomery and George Benson, both known for their octave shapes, probably some other people too. So now, just with this little map, we can actually start adding to something we did before. So we got these open E's going on here. But now that we know, oh, there's something we can do with this string, because it's the D string, we can go down 2, and then 3 up. And now we've got, that's pretty cool. And now that we have the 2 A's we were working on before with this shape, well, we can use the G string and go 2 down and then 3 up. So we've got, and we can do that anywhere. Here's C. And it turns out, if we've got a note on this string, that means we can link down to here. And then we can do the same thing here. In other words, if we're playing this shape, because that gives us a high E string note, that we can also link it to the low E string, and then we can do this guy. And so, how does this help? Well, it helps because if you are playing a note up here, and you go, oh crap, what note is that? Let me link it to a note that I know for sure. Oh, that's a G sharp. And of course, this is a little bit like cheating if you want to be able to know that note immediately, but you can at least use your octave shapes to work back to a note you know better, like the low E string, right? And a lot of people recommend memorizing the notes on the low E string first. So you've got E, A, D, G, B, E, you've got bead, there we go, and then you've got E, F, G, A on your way to bead. And up here you've got A, B, C, D, E on your way to the E of bead. So from here, like I said, we can start crafting, especially based on the A string, because there's one more shape we got to talk about. Let's look at B's. So if I play a B here, I can go 2 down, 2 up. Then I can start from there and I can go 2 down and 3 up. And then I can link down to my low E string. And then I can go 2 down and 2 up. And then I can actually, from here, I can still go 2 down and 3 up. But what do I link to this one? What do I do with this? Well, let's go back down to a C chord. And this might be a hint, actually, at how this relates to the CAGED system, which I'll show you in a minute. And to me, memorizing it this way with just those shapes by themselves is just fine, but linking it to the CAGED system is like, it's very eye-opening. So if we take a C chord and we think about how, oh, there's a root note here and a root note here, oh shoot, now we just have an octave shape. And if we were to play an E chord, well, we already know we've got this and this. So that means this is also a shape we can move around. And it kind of matches this shape, but this is on the A string and the B string, and this one is on the D string and the E string. Right? So what we can start to do is we can start to create a little cascade where we can go full circle on the neck. So let's start with the C's. So from here we can go, okay, I've got 2 C's here. Where's my next C? Well, this one can go 2 down, and then 2 toward the body. And then this one can go 2 down, 3 toward the body. And then this one can link to the low E string. And then here we can go 2 down, 2 up. And then here we can go 2 down, 3 up. And then here we can link back to that same C chord based thing here, right? It looks like a C chord. So all of this is basically how to do it, and you can work forwards or you can work backwards. You can start on pretty much any note on the guitar and go, oh shoot, I don't remember that note. Well, do I remember this one? I do. That's an F. Or if you can go back to, oh, there we go. And to me, breaking it down to these simple shapes, which I could just play all those shapes, next to each other, instead of thinking of linking them all as octaves. We've got this shape, 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 and we've got this shape. So, to make it easier, to make it a little more visual, if I click, let's click a nicer visual. Let's do green. So this little map of notes is everything we just covered, and you can see all those shapes, right? This shape, this shape, this shape, this shape, this shape, this shape, and then we're back to this shape, and it just keeps going, right? Those are all the shapes. So how does this relate to the CAGED system? Well, I got that C in there. If I were to play a C chord, well, it turns out these are the root notes in the C chord. If I were to play the next chord in the CAGED system shapes, which would be an A-shaped C chord, well, that would be the root notes of that A-shaped chord. In fact, anytime you play this bar chord, those notes will always be the root notes of that shape. Same with this chord. If you're playing this shape, these 2 notes will always be the root note of that shape. These 2 C's, these 2 notes will always be the root note of that shape. And then up here, the next shape is the G shape, and it turns out hard to play, but those are all the root notes in like an open G chord shape. So that would be the open note of the G chord shape. This would be these guys. Sometimes people play it like this. I will show you all in open position as well. And then the next chord in the CAGED system shapes is an E shape, and that gives us that familiar one we were talking about with the outside E strings, right? But those are always going to be the root notes in an E chord shape. And then if we go up here, we got the D string to the B string. These will always be the root notes in the D shape, right? And then we're back to the C shape. So one of the coolest things to me is if we just play these in open position, you can probably see a little bit better what I'm talking about. Play a C chord, bam, those are the root notes of a C chord. Play the next chord in the CAGED system, A, bam, those are the root notes in an A chord. Play a G chord, bam, those are the root notes in a G chord. Play an E chord, and bam, those are the root notes in the E chord. And then the D chord, just like we talked about, those are the root notes in a D chord. So just to kind of drive this home, these octave shapes have to follow the CAGED system shape pattern, because that's the guitar is just laid out in caged format. You kind of can't escape it, which is another lesson I want to do. So here's a D chord, and here are the root notes in that D chord, inescapable. The next shape in the CAGED system is a C shape, right? And those are the two notes of a C chord shape that are always the root notes, right? The next shape in the CAGED system is the A shape, and again, we've got those root notes that are associated with an open A chord, right? Same shape, right? Then we've got the G shape that again has the outside root notes and then the G string root note, which if we map that back, I don't think I'm stretchy enough. That maps to a G chord, right? And then let's keep moving up. I really want to drive this home. Here's an E chord shape. It's actually a D chord, but it's an E chord shape. And again, the root notes match what they would match in open position if you were to play those are the root notes in an E chord shape. So, like I said, memorizing octave shapes, it's helpful to just think of think of those individual shapes, but it's also really, really helpful to link them to a particular chord shape, like in the CAGED system, basically. And you cannot escape the CAGED system. In fact, if I were to punch in the rest of the notes to like a D chord here, every single note in the chord is still going to follow this CAGED system pattern. It's just going to be kind of wonky. Here's what I'll show you what I'm talking about. And this, I might confuse some people, but maybe it'll be worth it for a little bit of fun here. So check this out. The third of the chord, F, this one is following that E shape pattern, which means the next shape will be a D shape pattern, which means the next shape will be a C shape pattern, which again, we're not, this is the F sharp of a D chord, but we're sort of just temporarily treating it like a root note to show you what I'm talking about. Here's the F sharp, the root note of the A shape, right? And here's the G shape. In other words, regardless of what actual chord you're playing, your every note on the fingerboard is always going to follow this pattern, right? Here's an A. Well, this is obviously open, so it's going to follow that A shape pattern, which means what's the next shape it's going to follow? It's going to follow the G shape pattern, right? There's that G chord shape, and then here's that's on the high E string. Also, what's after G in the CAGED system? It's the E shape. So those A's are following that E shape, and then here we got what's following the D shape. So obviously this is just actual D chords up the neck, but I'm just trying to show you that even if we're not focused on the root note of a chord, every single note on the fingerboard follows this pattern. And if I do something just kind of silly here, it'll look really obvious, right? If I play an E and then in a different color I'll do an F, you can see, well, obviously every E has to go up half a step, which means that shape is going to be maintained, which means obviously if I can do this, then I can do this with F, which means if I can do this with E, I can do this with F, and that just keeps going up the fingerboard. This stuff is really logical, but sometimes it's really helpful to have someone just show you, right? These are all E's, these are all F's, these are all F sharp, these are all G, right? These are all E's, these are all F's, these are all F sharp, these are all G. So it's like, oh, of course every note on the fingerboard actually has to follow the CAGED system pattern if you are just thinking of it in sort of like root note type patterns based on the CAGED shapes. If you want to learn more about this kind of thing, I have two series that I'm really proud of that I worked really hard on my Patreon called CAGED Basics 1 and CAGED Basics 2. Both series have probably between 7 and 10 videos with PDFs and homework and practice and stuff to really drive the CAGED system into your head, especially because CAGED is not something to do. CAGED isn't instructions for how to play the guitar. It's just a way to map out how things look on the guitar, and it's up to you to figure out what to do with that information. Anyhow, this is most of what I had planned today. Just a nice quick little lesson on octave shapes. Does anyone have any questions about this kind of thing? I'm just going to look. David Coward says, finally, the CAGED system is coming together for me. Happy to hear that. Cool. Awesome. I don't see any specific questions, so I might just mess around with this little tool here real quick, and if I see a question, I'll pop that back up. But in the meantime here, hopefully if we go back to this screen here, which again, go to my website, scottpauljohnson.com, scroll down to scratch paper, and you'll be presented with this system. This awesome graph paper, and this is literally just scratch paper for messing around with the guitar. And if you can practice sort of seeing these shapes on the fingerboard and then also practice playing them, these will be really helpful things for you to do. So like here I just mapped out an E chord, and even just looking at the screen here, I can see, okay, that G sharp is sort of outlining the G-shaped chord. These two B's right here are sort of outlining the A shape of the chord. These two E's are outlining a C shape. It all kind of makes sense to me. Yeah, so I see a question. I want to see if I can get this one. Jeremy says, it's interesting to me that all guitar chord shapes are caged. The only two chords not represented are F and B because those are played with E and A shapes. Open voicings, I mean cowboy chords. Yeah, exactly. In fact, this is such a common question that I get on my how to use the CAGED system to play a solo video. People always ask, what about F? What about B? And you just nailed it. There's no F chord and B chord in the CAGED system in the same sense that there's no F sharp chord in the CAGED system or a B flat chord. It's because the CAGED system is really just representing open chords. Jeremy says, and those are the two notes where there's no semitone between them. Is that a weird connection to make, or does that make sense? You know, in this case, it might just be a lucky guess. I think if the guitar was tuned differently, it might not be called the CAGED system. Does that make sense? So yeah. Okay, we got a couple questions coming in. V says, do you solo mostly in the minor and major pentatonics and then just use the Dorian and major to fill in with extra notes? Exactly. David, I see your question. I'll get to that, but this is such a fun question that I want to talk about it more. So I actually want to do, I might do a little teaser of this because this is the lesson I wanted to do next week, but maybe I'll just do a little snippet about it this week. So the pentatonic scale, part of what is so cool about the pentatonic scale is, let's use the A minor. Actually, I'm going to do a little zoom in here. Whoa, don't get dizzy, anyone, okay? So, you don't get to see my face. Too bad. Get used to it. So here's an A minor pentatonic scale. However, this is also a C major pentatonic scale. So because major and minor scales are relative, C major and A minor are always going to share the same shape and just have a different root note. And now that we just talked about that stuff, you see these shapes here? You recognize them from what we talked about earlier? That means that the one chord shape that goes with this particular pentatonic scale is going to be a G shape. Those are the root notes. Wow, do you see the G shape like we were talking about before? Anyhow, let's go back to A for a second. Hey, oh, I went the wrong octave. There we go. I'm trying to put an A in there. So you recognize this as the root notes of the minor chord. Well, these correspond to the E shape, but because it's a minor chord, the one chord in this case would be an E minor shape. That's just a little thing that's related to what we were talking about before. Anyhow, if I were to temporarily fill in the two missing notes here, which would be F and B, well, now I would have a full minor scale, or I would have a full major scale, which would be so those are the missing notes from the pentatonic scale, and you can always add them in, and I cannot stress this enough. There isn't like a, okay, the pentatonic scale is special and is magical, but we don't base a lot of like music theory on it. For example, chords in a key are always going to be based on the 7 notes of the major or minor scale. So the pentatonic scale being a stripped down version of that and basically removing the notes that are half steps, part of the advantage of that, I'm going to zoom back in more here, part of the advantage of having those extra notes is those are the 2 notes that are missing, or not that are missing, but that will be changed when you play other modes. In other words, there are 2 minor modes and 2 major modes. Here's a C major scale, and one major scale, or one of the major modes is Mixolydian mode. And that should say B flat. I don't know if I can change it. Hang on, I can change it. There we go. So the difference between a C major scale and a C Mixolydian scale is the difference between B and B flat. And those are the notes that are missing from the pentatonic scale. So if you were just playing a pentatonic scale, you could be playing in a Mixolydian situation or in a, I think I'll go back up here. You could be playing in a Mixolydian situation, or you could be playing in a major scale situation. And if you just use the major scale as, or the pentatonic scale as scaffolding, you can end up in any situation. And this is true because the other mode is Lydian mode, which is, and again, I gotta switch back to sharps because that's supposed to be an F sharp. So we basically have your major scale, and then we've got 2 other major modes, and they're basically called major modes because they're 1 note different from a major scale, but it just happens to be the 2 missing notes of the pentatonic scale. If we go to the minor key here, we have the same situation. We've got the regular old minor scale. Then we've got what's called Phrygian mode, which is a flat second note. And then the other mode is Dorian mode, which is a sharp 6th note. And you notice, oh, sorry, yeah, I played it right. You notice it's the same 2 notes. So in other words, here's the notes for the major scale, and then here are the 2 weird notes that that will be played in the other modes. So they're just missing. And if you look down here, right, those are other notes that you could end up playing in any situation. So if you're playing a song that uses Dorian mode, we're going to be adding an F sharp, and we're going to be adding a B. So right, and usually it's this major chord that is like the most right. That's going to be some kind of honestly pretty crappy Dorian noodling, right? So this is part of the reason why I love the pentatonic scale, especially on guitar. If you're just playing the pentatonic scale and you essentially have 2 notes per string instead of 3 notes per string, and And that gives you this really strong foundation of this as a place to work from, and then and you can kind of dance around it by oh, I have to access this F sharp or this B, or I've got to access this F or this B flat. It should say B flat. That's why I love the pentatonic scale as a starting point, is because it can basically be in any situation except for sort of Locrian, but even then, kind of. But I don't want to get into that. So let me see. V, does that feel like that answers your question fairly well? I might dig into that a little bit more next week, but that's kind of a fun thing to think about. David Lopez says, how do you build the major and minor pentatonic scales based on the CAGED system? Well, that definitely ties in to the kind of stuff we're talking about today, so let's talk about that for a second. And again, I have a whole course on getting to know the CAGED system a lot better, that I'll just give you a little snippet of that kind of info here. So let's strip this for a second. And how do I want to do this? Okay. First of all, if we look at like a D major chord, and then we think about how do we turn this into a D minor chord? Well, of course, sound off in the chat. Everyone who knows how to make a major chord a minor chord, you take the third of the chord, right? Root, third, fifth. You take the third of the chord and you flat it, which just means move it down in pitch 1/2 step. And so now we have a major chord turned into a minor chord. But if you're thinking about this kind of thing in a song, it's not very, I mean, it's common, but not very common to have an A major and an A minor in a song. And it's certainly less common to have an A major, an A minor, and a D major, and a D minor, or have an E major and an E minor. Most of the time, it's more useful to know the relative minor of a chord. And so, quick, what's the relative minor of a D major chord? Well, it turns out you can take the fifth of a major chord, move it up a whole step, and then just keep the other two notes, and that gives you the relative minor. I'm going somewhere with this that'll tie the CAGED system and pentatonic scales together. So here's a major chord and its relative minor. Here's an A major chord. Quick, how do we turn this into its relative minor? We take the fifth of the chord, which is A, C sharp, and E, and we move that up a whole step, and now we've got an F sharp minor, right? Here's a G chord. Quick, what's the relative minor of G? Let's take the fifth, root, third, fifth, move it up a whole step, and now we've got E minor. So G major and E minor are relative major and relative minor. And if you're playing a song that has a G chord in it, you're way, way more likely to find an E minor chord in there than you are to find a G minor chord. And so these sets of relative major and relative minor, it's good to keep in mind, because chances are, if you're playing an A major chord, you're probably going to be also playing an F sharp minor chord. And if you're playing a D major chord, you're probably going to be playing a B minor chord as well. At least in terms of likelihood, it's much more likely, because the 1 chord and the 6 chord in a major key, or the 1 chord and the 3 chord in a minor key, inescapable. Way more likely. So there's something really cool that happens when you map out a major chord. And I lost my pick, but that's okay. A major chord and its relative minor. So A, C, E. This gives us something this gives us 4 notes, and this gets us eerily close to a pentatonic scale. I mean, even look up here, you see what are we missing? Well, it turns out any pair of a major chord and its relative minor is one note away from a pentatonic scale. And it depending on how you look at it, you could just say, oh, I'm missing the second note of the major scale. So if I play a major chord and its relative minor, and then I just include a note that's a whole step up from the root note, which would be this guy, well, now all of a sudden I have pentatonic scales that are based on a set of major chords and their relative minor. So here's a C chord, which is also a C-shaped chord, and its relative minor, which is A minor and also an A minor shape. And then we have a pentatonic scale that just fits in the location where I played that major chord and its relative minor. And as you know, the CAGED system, the C shape is you know, we say it's the first one, but it's just the first because of the spelling and because we happen to play a C chord first, but the next would be an A shape. And if we go, okay, here's an A chord and its relative minor, sort of like a F sharp minor, which we've got this familiarity here of, oh yeah, if this is an A minor, this is an F sharp, like what am I trying to say? An A major shape and sort of like an F sharp minor kind of shape. That pairing gives us like just a pentatonic location that's basically just made of a major chord and its relative minor. And if we move up to this G shape, well, this is the next one in the CAGED system, right? C, A, G, this is the G shape. That's a G chord shape and an E minor chord shape. And then we're one note away, once we added that pink note, that just gives us a pentatonic scale, and that goes all the way up the neck. So essentially, the CAGED system, again, if we just start with, this is a great way to tie everything together that we did before, right? We had these octave shapes, and we went, wow, it's cool to think about this as just like a cool shape system to memorize. And then we went, hang on, why don't we add the rest of a chord there? And then we've got, oh, that's because it lines up with the CAGED system, right? Oh, cool. And then we went, oh, well, what if we add the relative minor, which I'm going to keep in green. That just gives us one extra note, because now we've got C major and A minor, the relative major and relative minor chords, which also gives us the two different root notes of these scales, right? The C is the root note of the C chord, the A is the root note of the A minor chord. Then all we need is one extra note in there, and suddenly we just got this pentatonic scaffolding that's just based on playing these shapes in these positions. And it just keeps going all the way up the neck. Again, I'm sort of doing the fastest version of this lesson, but if you want jam tracks to play along with, if you want PDFs that you can stare at while you're trying to make sense of this stuff, check out my series CAGED Basics 2, CAGED Basics 1 and 2. I think you'd really, really appreciate that stuff. I'll put a link in the description to that specific lesson so that you can check it out. I think, let me check out the chat a little bit more. Andrew says, awesome, Scott, all starting to fall into place. If you play an E shape in a random place up the neck, you look for the root position on an E shape, and that tells you what chord you're playing. Yes, exactly. I don't actually know what extended pentatonic is technically, but yeah, so cool. Let's just take a minute to check in on Betty, and then I don't know, I love writing some music. I kind of want to, but depends on what everyone's feeling. Let's just check on Betty first. She seems aware that I'm talking to her. Betty, you want to say hi to the people? Say hi. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Let's see. Okay, Jeremy, your message isn't coming through. That's a user error on my end. But I can read the rest of it here. There we go. I hate that all this makes perfect logical sense and still feels like soup in my brain when I try to actually use it. So this is where you got to start with baby steps. You got to get to know one shape system really well, like the C shape or the G shape, and get to know that one shape, be able to jam on that pentatonic scale, be able to think about the adding the extra notes just in that one position. And if this stuff's already pretty familiar to you, I also have a series called CAGED soloing, and it's basically taking chord progressions like a 1-2 progression or a 1-4 progression or a 1-6 progression, and just walking you through like how to target chord tones in one position of the pentatonic scale, CAGED pentatonic scale basically. Yeah. So Chats says, can you quickly explain the relative to minor? Oh, you can't see that. I gotta fix my chat. I don't quite know what you mean, Chats. Can you be a little more specific with your question? And in the meantime, I'm gonna make sure I didn't miss another question. Oh yeah, no, I answered some multiple questions at a time. Yeah. Aquib, I don't know how to say your name. Aquid Haved would be my guess. Sorry, just joined. I get tripped up in understanding how a shape is, let's say G or E, deeper into the fretboard. Apologies if you already covered it. I think I did already cover that, but you can also learn a lot more about that on my Patreon. I recommend checking it out. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Ches also says, I was stunned when I saw how B.B. King's solo, The Thrill Is Gone, was just one pattern on the B minor pentatonic scale. Yeah, that's... Okay. Okay, we gotta go to church, because I gotta tell you something. Okay, guitar church. Uh-oh. Guitar church is broken, it looks like. Where are we? Okay, I guess guitar church is broken. Never mind. Church is gone. No church today. That's new. I tell you what, it's just me connecting all these cameras and figuring out how to run them, and sometimes stuff happens. But let me tell you something here, okay? People get surprised to hear that B.B. King's solo was done in just one position. And here's the thing. A lot of people set out to become a musician, and then they get tripped up on trying to prove in a technical sense that they know enough stuff and that they can play enough complicated stuff to call themselves a musician. But most of the music we love it almost not because it's simple, but because it's relatable, and because it's well, I mean, relatable often is less about being complex and more about emoting and about expressing yourself and about, trying to connect who you are to your instrument. And that kind of stuff takes a different kind of practice than playing scales or speeding, your tempo up on your scales or something like that. And I think part of what I want to preach here, which, man, I'm really bummed that my guitar church isn't working today, but maybe I'll just do tangent camera instead, because this is important, and I want a different angle to talk at. So part of what I do, and part of what's most important to me as a teacher, is not technique. It's not how many songs you know. It's not how many difficult things can you play. It's, are you expressing yourself? Are you enjoying what you're doing? And are you playing guitar in a way that you feel inspired to keep playing forever and to get better at the specific things that you are interested in, the things that excite you about playing music? And for me, I think a lot of people think, okay, I gotta get good at all these skills. I gotta play my scales faster. I gotta know more songs. I gotta learn that harder solo. All this stuff is like, I gotta be better at guitar. But but that's missing the whole point. The point isn't to be better at guitar. The point is to be able to express yourself. And this is part of the reason why on my Patreon I have a weekly community challenge that is centered around you being creative and you learning how to express yourself through writing in a really low stakes environment where we're just kind of having fun based on a really simple writing prompt. And for a lot of people, it's like, let me build up my skills, and then eventually someday, once I'm good at guitar, I'll think about what I want to do with guitar. And all your favorite artists do it backwards. They go, I'm going to try to write music, I'm going to try to express myself, I'm just going to try to make stuff and have fun. And the skills that I'm lacking trying to do that, those are the things I'm going to practice, but I'm just practicing them so I can do the thing that I love. And so for everyone watching, I just want to say, really think about your goals. Think about what inspires you about guitar and try doing that right now. And see if you can. And if you can't, think about the specific skills you need to actually be able to do that thing you want to do, and ignore the 10 things every guitar player should know. Ignore the 10 songs every guitar player should know. Ignore anyone who says you're not a real guitar player if you don't know X, Y, or Z. That stuff is BS. All your favorite artists, they're just doing what they want. I want to express myself. I want to write music. I want to make good songs. I want to be able to jam with people. Those are the things you want to start with, and those are the things you want to try doing right now and see how it goes. And as soon as you try to make music, you'll probably get a sense of what you're missing. And it's not some special, art goo talent stuff that other people have that you don't have. That stuff just takes practice too. So there is no magical point you're going to get to where you practice scales and learn other songs and then you can just magically write your own songs. No. Writing songs takes practice the same way getting your left and right hand to work together takes practice. It all takes practice. So, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I really just want you all to express yourselves and have fun. And all this stuff about how the guitar works is really secondary to your goals and what you want to do. And that's part of the reason why I'm also trying to promote my online school, is because I'm really passionate about reminding people that it's your goals and your passions and the things that are interesting to you that are going to keep you playing guitar forever. And if you get bored, a lot of people get bored because they're not following their own dreams. They're following a checklist of someone else's dreams, what they think a good guitar player ought to be. And to me, that's just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of meaningless to me. Anyhow, I don't see any other questions. So maybe I'll just call it a day. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, and have a great night. And I'll see you next week at the same time. If you want to come hang out, bring me some questions. Let's do it. See you all later. If I can remember how to leave, goodbye. Take care. Yeah, I forgot how long this outro takes. Goodbye, everybody. See you next time.